Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we so proudly present the first episode ever of the Hollywood Backlot with Lou and you right here on That Park Place Podcasts online. Welcome to our show right here. We are graced in the presence of Hollywood royalty right here. Lou Wasserman's ghost. Lou, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm fine, but whenever you give me that buildup, I feel like those guys in the war movies who say, "I'm a sergeant. You don't sir me. I work for a living." You know. So
you're too modest. You're too humble, sir.
I'm not. No, I'm not.
Well, hey, I really do appreciate you coming on the show. Actually, this was all your idea right here, and I think it's just a wonderful, like I've said before. You are. Oh, go ahead.
No, most of the questions that happened in the other shows, whether it's the genre guys or the regular shows on the other channels, are so specific to a current thing or to a specific old movie or something that I thought there's lots of people, lots of general questions about how the heck this crazy business works and how it's different or the same as the businesses you may know and work in and have ownership of or whatever. And it's pretty different. It's very, very different.
I do agree, and you're such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to like classic Hollywood, classic, studio backlot stuff about the business that I think a lot of people don't even think of. You have so much experience in that realm, and obviously you read a lot, which not a lot of people do anymore.
I've also talked to and known a lot of people. I mean,
yeah,
it's to me the past is prologue, and it all resonates into the current. I happen to be reading right now a book about ancient civilizations, about Egypt and Persia and Greece and all of that. But the author, who happens to be Conrad Black, who's a wonderful writer and famous man, he keeps referring to, and when with Pick a Greek did this, it was kind of similar to when Napoleon and Hitler both went into Russia and failed. And it's like making those connections that human beings are human beings through the ages is kind of interesting to me. So in that sense, what was past is prologue, especially with Hollywood. Even if people nowadays don't remember it, they don't realize they're doing the same thing that was done 40, 50, 75 years ago.
Exactly. And that's my interest in history. I mean, history can be so predictive sometimes. It doesn't necessarily, repeat, but it does rhyme, right? I think that's
and that thing about, those who don't pay attention to it are doomed to repeat it.
Right.
They're doomed to repeat it anyway because they're human beings. They might be aware of it. They might not be aware of it, but they're still. But anyway, meanwhile, back in showbiz.
It
occurs
by
to
the
me,
way,
when we're talking about how it's different from every other business, one of the great, really powerful truths of that was taught to me by a guy named Art Murphy, who was the valiant renegade of Daily Variety. Okay, he did the numbers. He did the backstage. And his big point was, every other business in the world, the cost of production of the goods determines the cost of sale. In this business, whether you spent 10 million, 50 million, 300 million, it's still so much at the box office when the people go to buy it. That's kind of weird. That's kind of strange in the world of regular business. So it's something to consider. But anyway.
No, I think you're exactly right. And it's so, especially in today's age and with social media and everything else, we hear so many stories, and I think people are unaware just how repetitive some of those things are, and especially
so many people are buying the hype that gets put out as news.
Right. Exactly.
I always said, I had a dear friend of mine was the head of advertising and publicity at Universal for many years, including the years of movies like Jaws. And, they didn't know that movie was going to make it, and they were worried. And that's when they started doing all this PR about, isn't this amazing, this mechanical shark we built that looks like the real thing? As great as that was, as interesting as it was, as big as the movie was, I'm absolutely convinced the movie would have been more successful still if you didn't know it was a machine. To me, that took a lot of the magic out of it, and it took a lot of the fear out of it too, because you could cut, well, yeah, but I read about that. It's only this hydraulic thing, and all about how it didn't work and it did work. And it just sometimes there's part of the magic. There's a reason why magicians don't tell you how they do their tricks. You know what I mean? So, and
Right.
nowadays, especially with the internet and social media, and well, people like us being experts, we give away a little too much of the game. But I'm going to give it away anyway, as long as and let's set the ground rules from the beginning. We've mentioned this in the previews. I
Please.
will not reveal things that are personal and confidential to individuals I've worked with. I will not speak very specifically about particular shows or movies or whatever that I've been a part of, because I
Right.
respect the privacy of the people involved. And also because, since among my many credentials, I have been involved in the direct negotiations of major contracts for some of the biggest guilds and industries. Um, there's some of that stuff I literally cannot say as me, which is why I'm here as Lou's ghost. So it's just a question of confidentiality, and within those bounds, anything goes. Go for it,
Hey,
gang.
we completely understand. I'm just gracious to even have you as part of any program, much less this one right here. I mean, it's just
Well,
it's crazy to think, and this is the wellspring of knowledge that I was talking about before. By the way, if you want to ask your questions as well, you can go ahead and do so right down below, right there,
yeah,
T3P
that's our
online
magic
at
email
Yahoo.
address. We will be
All right,
reading the comments for questions too, but we understand some people would rather do it by email, some would
right,
rather do it by comments, and send them in. And by the
exactly.
way, if we don't get to yours this week, that doesn't mean we threw them out. We might get to them next week or the week after that or whenever it works out. So don't give up the ship. Okay.
That's right. That's right. And like Lou said, in the comments below, we will also take that as well. But
Well,
let's go
let's
ahead and get
answer a
to our.
question. Go ahead and
That's
ask me one.
You got it. You got it right here from Captain John D. Which, by the way, every single time he comes up here, I gotta do it. Gotta do it. He asks his question right here: do crew members work their way up through the indie film circuit before getting work for big studios? What's the typical pipeline?
Well, it all depends on what it is you do. Sure, people work on independent stuff mainly because they don't have to follow union and guild minimums and rules. They can work cheaper that way, which is why those indie films get made when maybe they wouldn't get made if they had to pay everybody. Nowadays, there's such a proliferation of work. I told people 15 years ago, 20 years ago in the business, there's going to be 10 times as much work for half the money. Because once upon a time, when there were 3 networks, even if you were the losing show in your time slot, to take television as one example, there's true of movies too. Even if you were the worst, and even if you got canceled, you still got X zillion pairs of eyeballs and ears watching and listening because that's all there were. But now, with so many different choices, it's a little different. But as far as being an organized way to work your way up, there is and there isn't, depending on what you do. And this gets into this funny thing called the QL. Now, not all the unions have it. Some of the guilds do. The one I'm most familiar with is the one in the Directors Guild. QL stands for Qualification List. And it was invented because of nepotism. Because somebody would say, hey, you're making that movie for my studio? I want you to put my brother-in-law in as an assistant director. I know he doesn't know how, but it doesn't matter. I want him to take that slot. And that meant that somebody who was qualified didn't get it. So they came up with this thing called the QL. And basically what it is, you have to document the number of hours and the number of shows you've done in the non-pro, non-guild world, and then apply to be placed on what's called the QL, the qualification list. And there are different ones. There's a New York one, there's a Hollywood one, there's a commercials one, there's what's called the third area. And that's a whole thing to explain by itself. In all of the basic stuff that we do, there's New York, there's California, and there's the third area, which is everything in between. And that gets into the whole question of shooting on location and who can get hired and who can't. But the point is, there is a system to work your way up. You have to document the number of hours, and you might get on the QL and qualified for television, but not for movies, or for LA, but not for New York, or for the third area, and then get X number of hours more. And that will, then you apply to be moved onto the regular list. Either way, just because you're on the list and working doesn't mean you're a member yet. You have to get to the point where you are qualified to become a member. Even though if you're working on a union show, portions of your wages are being deducted by you and also from the employer's side to go into things like pensions and health benefits and all that sort of thing. Does that explain it well, or is that more confusing than it needs to be? The QL is the way you get in if you're new. It's one way to get in. We also, for example, in the Directors Guild, have what we call the training program, where every year people apply, and we take about, it depends on the year. Sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 30. And you will see those people listed even in the credits of things as being a trainee assistant director. And they basically shadow the real guys and do small things and learn the business that way. So there are many ways to get in. Working in the indie circuit is good, but you got to keep track of everything you do, because when you apply for the QL, you have to, or for membership, you've got to present the proof. You got to show pay stubs. You got to show lists of cast and crew. I remember one time I sat on the membership committee for a while. Somebody submitted as one of their proofs the cast T-shirt that they gave everybody at the end of the show to prove they were on it. And you know what? It didn't prove how many hours they worked, but it proved they were there. That's for sure.
Right. Because I'm sure there's, if you're attempting to, let's say, do away with some nepotism there, I'm sure there, even with a qualified list like that, there are ways to maybe influence it, and it's like, no, we got to have proof. We got to have substantiation that you have actually worked on some of these projects right here.
Well, watching the credits is, of course, another thing that we keep track of, and partly to keep track of who it says worked on it, and partly to make sure you get the credit. You might all remember the time when suddenly they started squeezing the credit roll down to the left-hand side of the screen on TV and making it go very fast. Well, who gets what credit, how often, and in what size, and in what placement, and after what, is all in the contract. And they have to follow that. It isn't just, well, we'll give you a credit. In fact, my wife is reminding me in the background that once upon a time, my dear grandmother, who knew I was doing a particular show, after about the third season, she called me up one day and she said, "I think they're leaving your name up longer." And I said, "No, they're not. You're just ready for it now." You're just waiting for it, so you see it a little better than you did when it ran by at 100 miles an hour without it. But
that is fantastic.
There's all these different rules and things. I mean, for example, I was mentioning to somebody, I forget which show it was on, but recently we were talking about The Simpsons, and I asked when they talked about how many episodes of The Simpsons there are on, I think it's on Hulu.
Right.
I said, does that include all the little bits they did for Tracy Ullman? Because remember, The Simpsons started as a segment of the Tracy Ullman Show. And the funny thing about the Tracy Ullman Show was, of course, it was all sketches. It was all bits. And sometimes you'd shoot for a week on a regular sitcom schedule, but you'd make more bits than got into any 1/2 hour. Well, that was fine if you were a director or if you're a director, you're directing. And if you're an AD, you're working that week. But as it happens, on one of the particular jobs that I do on those shows, I get paid by the episode, not by the day, not by the week, not by the hour, but by the episode. So what happens when they use the pieces of the week I was there, because I only filled in for 1 week on that show to help a friend who was out of town. What happens when they're in 2 different shows? Do I get 2 episodes? Do I get 1 episode? And all this stuff goes into discussion and arbitration and all that sort of thing. So there are a zillion rules, and they're important, and they've been fought for in very hard negotiations, and they're the stuff you never see because it's behind the scenes.
Wow. Man, that is incredible insight. I mean, just...
In fact, that week that I did that show, and this will let people find me, I guess, so I shouldn't say it, but I will. The choreographer on the Tracy Ullman Show, because they did musical numbers every so often, was somebody nobody had ever heard of at that point, named Paula Abdul. And the week that I did the show where we did a big musical number with her was the week that her first record broke and she suddenly became a star. And that was an exciting thing to watch, was the emotions that she went through as suddenly she was not, an anonymous person, but somebody overnight, basically, because you remember that song was such a huge instant hit.
Huge, massive. That's awesome. That is so amazing there.
On the other hand, you see,
Yes.
On shows like that, where you have a lot of wonderfully creative people, I'll never forget, we were doing one sketch, and it was three of the actors and the director, and it was late in the day, and the boss came down to the set and came to me and said, how come I'm still in this one scene? Why haven't they finished rehearsing it yet? And I said, because you have some wonderful actors and a wonderful director, and there are probably 400 different ways to interpret these lines, and they're going to try every last one until they find the right one. He said, thank you. I'll fix that. And went in and told him, we got another show to do that next week. We don't want to be here still at the same time, same station.
Nice.
Everybody understand that everybody involved in every one of these things is trying to do it right, is trying to do it. When you see something and say, God, that stinks. What was wrong with them? Why'd they make that stinker? They didn't know, and they thought it was good. Honest, they did. Nobody goes out to make a bad one, a movie, a TV show. On the other hand, as I've said before, I can watch a movie that's not going so well, and you get this feeling that every day on that set, for everybody from the director to the key grip to the craft service guy, caterer, it was work. It was not fun. And I'm not talking about whether it's a comedy or a drama. I'm just talking about, it was, how many pages do I have to get through today? Let's just get it done. Because people were not gelling. The material wasn't working. And of course, nowadays they say, okay, well, let's all stop and talk about it for 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks and rewrite it and redo it. And what the heck? It's only money.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean,
all right, that's another question, but I think that I killed that one.
I think you did. I think you did. Well, we have another question from Captain John D right here. Will we ever see an era again, including prolific directors like Raoul Walsh or John Ford in terms of output?
No, because he's asking about, these guys did a lot of movies. And one of the things about Hollywood history you have to understand is that up until the late 1940s, and I'll tell you why in a minute, everybody was on salary. Everybody was on a 50 weeks with 2 weeks off job on a contract. In many cases, contracts running for 7 years or longer. And that meant that you finished movie A today and you started movie B tomorrow. This is why when you see all the great, for example, just one example, Warner Brothers movies, and you see Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet and all these great character actors, and they're in Casablanca today, and they're on Sam Spade Mystery tomorrow. And the reason is they're all on salary. And that's everybody from the plumbers who run the studio bathrooms to the electricians to the telephone operator, all of that. And therefore, they made a lot of movies because, by God, they were getting paid whether they sat around or whether they worked, and the studios wanted them working. And it's why so many of them did so many varied things. I mean, you look at some of these guys, and you think of John Ford, you think of Westerns, but he did a lot of not Westerns. You think of so many of the great directors, just to give one example, and the writers. But then what happened? What happened was, in the old days, when movies started, the studios owned the studio, the production side. They owned the distribution, and they either owned or had locked in contracts with the theaters, which meant they had all three phases of production. They had production, distribution, and exhibition. And the government, right after World War II, said, you know what, that violates antitrust. You guys are basically a closed shop. And part of the reason why they did it was, in case you ever wondered the term B picture and how many of those they made them because they had a place to put them. If they had to go out and sell them fresh like they do now, it never would have happened. And that's because they told Theater X in Podunk, if you want the new John Wayne movie, you got to take these 6 stinkers too. Not stinkers, they didn't call them stinkers, but B pictures were just that. In other words, for example, I think MGM in 1939 made 57 feature films. That's more than one a week, for God's sakes. And the reason they could, and the reason they did, was because everybody was on salary and because they had a guaranteed place to put them. Well, when the government said, listen, here's what we'll do. We'll make a deal. You can keep 2 out of the 3. Well, they had to keep production. That's where you make the product. And they had to keep distribution because that's where you get the money. So what they gave up were the theaters. That's why in so many cities and towns across America, you see the Paramount Theater, the Warner, whatever, the Fox Theater, because those were literally owned by the studios, and they aren't anymore. Well, suddenly they said, well, wait a minute. If we don't own the exhibition and if we can't force all the little theaters to take all these pictures, How come we're paying everybody a weekly salary? We got a great idea. Let's only pay them by the picture. At which
Yes.
point, guys like my doppelganger over here, Lou, who was the biggest agent in town, basically said, okay, only pay him for a movie, but you're going to pay him a whole hell of a lot more per movie than you were paying him per week. So,
Right.
these things, yin and yang, it's like what I said about when Disney came out and said, well, we're going to consolidate all the sports with ESPN, with Warner's and Netflix and whoever. And if they thought that was going to make the NFL and the NBA say, okay, well, I guess we're screwed because we don't have as many people to sell it to, so there's no competition. No, they're just going to raise the price like crazy because they have the cookie. And if you want it, you got to pay for it.
Of course.
So what happened was, and eventually Lou, the real Lou, was the first guy to get for his client, Jimmy Stewart, the first profit participation in a movie of anybody, a piece of the action. And of course, that opened up another whole kettle of worms. But the point is, the reason why these guys made so many movies is because they were on the clock. And it was, you finish this one, start this one. Now, they didn't literally go from one to the other right away. A lot of the actors did. A lot of the grips and electricians and everybody else did. You finished one on Tuesday and you started another one on Wednesday. But these guys, they were working all the time. And therefore, when he says prolific, you're not going to see that again. No. You're never going to see that again.
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's really interesting to track the history of Hollywood, especially like the fall of the golden era, like you were saying before, the studio system and how that gave kind of rise to the independent system, where you had people like Francis Ford Coppola, or George Lucas, or Steven Spielberg kind of get into the game outside of that studio system that used to exist, and it was. With the rise of competition, obviously, from the exhibition side of it, how that really changed the whole movie making landscape right there. It is a fascinating thing right there. But we have some other questions here, Lou.
Okay.
This one from Anne. And now I'm only putting up the partial question here on screen because, well, StreamYard's going to limit us, but I'll read you the whole thing right now.
Sure.
I've been hearing a good deal of talk about how there are no longer, quote, true movie stars of the type of the 40s, 50s, 60s, etc. As I've understood it, the old, quote, I'm going to make you a star line had some reality behind it. Were later famous stars ever actually found working as soda jerks or lifeguards or everyday jobs, or is that apocryphal? Assuming stars were deliberately created by the studios, how did that happen? Why did it stop?
Okay. This is partially the same answer, which is that everybody was on a contract. But when it came to actors, did they find people working as soda jerks and lifeguards? Sure. Were soda jerks and lifeguards people who got into the movies even if the studio didn't find them? Sure. But the main thing is, when they hired you as a young new arrival in town, if you got a contract, they put you through school. They taught you how to dress. They taught you how to walk. They taught you how to ride a horse or how to fence or whatever, and gave you lessons and gave you a dialogue coach and basically grew you. And of course, in that process, gave you little bitty parts that if you were any good, moved you up to bigger parts. Certainly a lot of it had to do with appearance. And certainly a lot of it had to do with obviously sex appeal and all the rest of that. But did they make them? Yeah, they did. Now, they didn't do it without the person having the ability. I mean, it's all well and good if the studio backs you if nobody wants to go see you. But yeah, that's how it happened. And why did it stop? Well, for that same reason, which is that they stopped hiring people on long-term contracts. It became more of a freelance business. In fact, one of the last contract players that I know of was actually Burt Reynolds, who started out on a deal like that. And he used to tell the story about standing in the background watching Spencer Tracy work at Universal, because that's where he was a contract player. And Tracy came off the set and saw him standing there and said, "You an actor, kid?" And he said, "Yes, Mr. Tracy, I am." And he said, "It's a great business as long as nobody catches you doing it," which I always thought was a great piece of acting advice. My other favorite piece of acting advice was Jimmy Cagney, who said, "The way you do this thing is you walk into the scene, you plant both feet, you look the other fella in the eye and tell the truth." Which I just think if you want to be an actor out there, you could not go far wrong with those two pieces of advice.
I don't think so. See,
but yes, they were created. And yes, I remember just reading recently this book that I've been telling people about, which is called Get Mahoney, about a guy named Mahoney, who was a premier PR guy in town, who talk about being in the right place at the right time. His family lived over the fence from MGM in Culver City. And when he was a kid, he would go buy sodas and snacks and sneak under the fence and sell them to the extras on the movies shooting on the back lot. And his father was a house painter, but because he was there and got to know people, he started doing houses for the executives at the studio. And this kid didn't really like school, didn't want to go into other businesses. And one day his father said, "Get in the truck. We're going out to do an estimate for a house job." He said, "What do you want me for?" He says, "Trust me, come along." And they drive out into the valley, and they drive to this big, beautiful ranch, and it's Clark Gable's house. And the kid is just, oh my God, Clark Gable. And he took a shine to the kid, and he said, "Well, why don't I make you one of my PR people at the studio?" And before you know it, this guy was in the business. So talk about being at the right place at the right time. That helps.
Right place, right time. And
Anyway, that's a great book for anybody who wants to read about how things were. This guy was the PR guy for everybody from Frank Sinatra to Debbie Reynolds to, well, you name it. He worked with them at MGM and then on his own as a freelancer.
Wow. Man. Incredible, Lou. Incredible. Thank you so much for answering that one for sure. Thank you, Ann, for your question right here. We have another one right here. I almost forgot about this one, but was able to get it in right now. This one comes from Jonas. I think I know Jonas around here somewhere. This is also another partial question. I'll go ahead and ask the whole thing here. I've always heard it said that, quote, according to Hollywood accounting, Return of the Jedi never made a profit. This is obviously a tactic to avoid paying cast and crew who get paid on percentages. How does this work?
First of all, very few crew people, as we define them, below the line, as it's called, get percentages. That just isn't. It's about actors, directors, producers, writers, basically. Right. Secondly, it's a question of percentage of what? The two most famous cases that actually got litigated over this, because most of them don't, because it's basically one of those, you'll never work in this town again if you raise a fuss because you think you got cheated. And so people don't put up too much of a stink, at least not in public. Art Buchwald, who some of you who are older will know was a great columnist and humorist, actually wrote the story that the Eddie Murphy movie Coming to America is based on, and sold it to Hollywood for a percentage. And he didn't get paid, and he wondered why. And so since he didn't care if he sold anything else, he sued. And there was a big court case, and you can go look it up. And during that court case, the kind of points that he had were defined by Eddie Murphy as, well, that's what we call monkey points. In other words, there's points and there's points, and there's percentages and there's percentages. And whether it's off the gross or the net or the other famous case is Victor Victoria. Now, you know the movie, of course, but what you may not know is that originally it was a German movie from a studio called UFA, UFA. And the guy that owned the rights actually got out of Germany during the war and kept those rights. And when they came to him and said, "We want to make this now again," and he said, "Swell." And he made a deal for X $1,000. And halfway through production, they said, "It's going so well, you would do better. And we could use the money more now for the budget. How about instead of paying you all that money, we give you a little money, but give you a percentage of the profits?" He thought, that's swell, because he wasn't in the movie business anymore. And somehow the film never made a profit. And he wondered why. And he actually, because he didn't care, sued. Among the things he found that I remember, this was in a Wall Street Journal article, I think, once upon a time. As you may know, the film was directed by Blake Edwards, and his wife, Julie, was the star, and Julie Andrews, and they had a home in Switzerland, and they had a home in Beverly Hills, and the movie was shot in London, or at the studios in England. So as part of their compensation, they had 20 first-class round-trip tickets from London to both LA and Switzerland for them, their kids, and their nanny, so that if on the weekend they wanted to go home, they could do that. And there were all these other things that were being charged against the production to explain why it never made any money officially on the books. The other thing, and I mentioned this to Jonas when he put it up, they will charge against the budget everything they ever expect to spend. the PR that's going to be done later, the promotion of the home video disc or tape, as it was, the TV stuff, everything goes up front. And then as the money starts coming in, it's being credited against that. So that's why a lot of movies never make it into
I
quote
see.
unquote profit. Because, well, for example, if any of you out there, probably a lot of you want to write the great American novel. And if you can get it published, which nowadays you can do yourself easier, but in the days of where you had to have an agent and go to a publisher, they will pay you what they call an advance against royalties, which is, oh, we'd like to have your book. We'll pay you $5,000. And you can pay us back out of your percentage of what comes in. Well, again, that percentage is after all the expenses are taken care of, which is the paper, the printing, the distribution, the displays in the bookstore, the promotion. And guess what? That advance is probably all you're ever going to see, because unless you're Robert Ludlum or you're, Jacqueline Suzanne or somebody whose books command huge numbers and get a much bigger advance to begin with, by the way, somehow that accounting never quite works out. So the point is, the percentages are a question of percentage of what.
Right.
There's probably too long to go into now, but some other time we'll talk about, there's a famous, big, huge thing that caused the last major strike in Hollywood before these recent ones, having to do with, well, since it's home video and we're supposed to get a percentage of that, is that a percentage of the distributor's money or of the producer's money? What does that mean? Well, let us say you are Mammoth Pictures and you make a movie and you are the producer of that movie, and you have a subdivision called Mammoth Home Video, and Mammoth Home Video puts out the home video of that movie. Well, I'm supposed to get a percentage. Am I getting it of what Mammoth makes or what Mammoth makes? And as you can see, it's one pocket paying the other pocket, but as they do, some of it comes off the top. And so which one you're getting your percentage of matters. And there was a big dispute between the industry guilds and the studios, and it caused a strike. And it's a much longer story than we have time for. But let's just say this, all the fine print matters. And if you have a really good agent, you get a good deal. And if you don't, you don't. And of course, it's also a question of, do they want to work with you again?
Sure.
If they don't, if they're not that excited about it, they don't care if they make you angry over this. And they will, just like everything else, they will do what they have to do to get through, but then fight afterwards. For example, in totally different subject, we've been talking about Reedy Creek and Sif Todd and all of that in Disney. And as you may have heard, Sif Todd has assessed the property taxes on Walt Disney World. And Disney says, oh, that's ridiculous. You've overvalued our property, as if that's possible. Guess what, though? They still pay the tax. They paid the amount that's in dispute, and afterwards they'll fight about, was that too much, and give me a refund. So it's a question of what you got to do to get by. And, well, that's a long way around answering this question, but it'll give you some idea. When people talk about Hollywood accounting, that's what they're talking about.
Gotcha.
I think percentage of what and when, and how much of what's happening in the future is already being credited against what's happening now to keep it from being a profitable, on paper, enterprise.
Right. Okay. And I think the other case involving this was over Forrest Gump, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
There was one there too, I believe. Yeah. But again, we have to remember that even though they're in showbiz by virtue of being creative people, a lot of people who write books, including the people with agents that are supposedly good, are not as familiar with Hollywood. Once upon a time, a very, very, very famous and well-known playwright, whose name I obviously will not mention, told me about how they decided to do a TV series based on one of his famous plays. And he said, sure, and signed the deal and got paid. And then after about 2 weeks of production having started, he thought he should go take a look and see if there's anything he could do to make it better and help them out. So he comes out from New York, because, of course, playwrights are in New York, and Hollywood is, one is Mars and one is Venus, and I don't know which one is which. But he comes out to L.A., and he says, and I was shocked to find out there was a staff of 12 writers, none of whom I knew, none of whose work I approved of, and all of whom were getting paid more than I was. Harumph. And my answer was, you have a lousy agent. I mean, you get the deal you get, and so when you blame everybody else because you got screwed, Certainly people do bad things, and we're seeing that with Gina and all of that.
Scarlett
But
Johansson.
yeah, Scarlett
A little bit.
Johansson.
A little
Funny
bit there.
thing, same lawyer. Anyway, but that's a whole other story.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
But
Indeed.
again,
For sure.
look, demanding stuff is cheap and free. Getting it takes time and money. So
Fair point. Fair point. Thank you so much, Lou. And thank you so much, Jonas, for asking that question. I will say.
yes.
Here, another one comes in here, and
Ah,
our final question of the day from Jim. Why do they call it the box office?
not for the reasons you think. Most people presume, well, that's where the cash box is. Or they think of like at the circus, the ticket booth, or even in days before one price, the Disneyland had box offices, ticket offices for
The
each
ticket
land,
booth.
and they sold tickets. It's
Mm.
got nothing to do with any of that, believe it or not.
Really?
It goes back to the live theater. And those of you who have been in or seen the classic opera houses and theaters, where there are what's called the box seats up along the sides of the theater, where you don't have to mingle with the hoi polloi in the general admission. In the
Oh.
old days, there was no ticket booth outside the theater. Literally, the tickets for that hoi polloi stuff were sold by some guy at the stage door. You went back there and you bought some tickets and you went in. But if you wanted to get one of those elite seats, that was what was called the box office, the office where they sold the box seats. And eventually it translated into the office where they sold all the seats, but it comes from box seats in the theater, and it goes back to about 1880 or so. And now you know the rest of the story.
Wow, that is. I did not predict that one. I thought we were going with the
cash box. Sure, that's the
yeah.
obvious thing. But well, and then of course, there's some funny box office stories for theaters. I don't know how many of you know the name William Castle, who was a great, wonderful, amazing producer of schlocky stuff on purpose, because that's what he did. If you ever saw a fantastic movie that I highly recommend called Matinee, starring John Goodman playing basically William Castle. And I met William Castle a few times. And they're doing this sci-fi movie. And this is a guy that did all the stuff with the buzzer in the seat making you jump, and the ghouls flying through the auditorium, and all of these gimmicks, and was a big proponent of 3D in the day. Well,
4D. It sounds
he
like.
made a movie called I think this was for the Tingler, but it might have been one of his other ones. And he had this great idea, he thought, to promote how scary it was. And of course, I know a lot of you just like horror movies for the horror, but the main reason in the 60s and those eras for taking your girl to a horror movie was that she jumped, and usually it was into your arms. There was a lot of romantic intent in horror movies in those days, at least as far as the audience. Anyway, he said, you know what? We're gonna show people how scary this is. And what he proposed to do was to set up an entirely separate box office outside the theater on the edge, bathed in yellow light, painted yellow, with a tape recording going, these people were yellow. They couldn't stay to the exciting conclusion of the movie. And the movie literally stopped 10 minutes before the end. And a narrator came on and said, if you are too faint of heart that you think you cannot possibly see the end of this horrible movie, leave now and we'll give you your money back. Well, the theater owners were totally against this because they thought, well, everybody's going to get their money back. That's just how people are.
Sure.
And he said, no, they won't. They'll be too shamed into not doing it. It'll be great. Well, they decided to arrange a test. And all the heads of the big movie chains came, and they went to the 8:00 show in a theater that had this set up. And when that moment came and the movie stopped and the announcer said that, everybody got up and left and got their money back. And Castle was shocked and amazed until he figured out what was going on. People were coming to the 6:00 show and staying through a whole second time in order to get their money back. So once they color-coded the tickets, because in those days, once you were in all day if you wanted to be,
Sure.
Suddenly that stopped and it worked and he made money. So there's a box office story of a different color. In this case,
Wow.
yellow, because you're all cowards.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. We I mean, there's no way I can top that. So I think that'll
I'm
just
afraid
about
I
do it
probably
for us.
can someday, but not today. Another day.
Yeah,
We will live.
exactly.
We'll live to fight another day. Unless you got another one, I'm open. It's up to you. You decide how long this should go.
No, no, no. I think we're just about good.
We've
You know,
given you
these
a flavor of what's going on here, folks.
right,
Just the
exactly,
beginning flavors of what's going on.
hundred
And
percent.
we welcome you to this brand new channel. And also remember, if you can't get enough of me, God help you, that the genre guys are coming here after we've done our, I guess it's 30 days of exclusivity as member perks on the Pro channel. They will come
90.
here. 90. Oh boy. Well, we better do some more. In fact, if you're a member of the Pro channel, or if you got a membership, because people are giving away memberships like crazy. And we realized that a lot of people, we saw a comment on one of them that said, how come I'm seeing this? I'm not a member. Well, yes, you are. You just weren't aware of it. And I mentioned to Pro that we've got to tell people to check and see if they did become a member, even if they didn't know it, because the first time you'll hear about it otherwise is when Yahoo says, hey, we hope you enjoyed the freebie. Now pay up. And you might be very offended by that. And it's not our doing. It's the way Yahoo works. Or Yahoo. Yeah.
Yeah, YouTube.
I mean YouTube. I don't know why I said Yahoo. But
No, you're
anyway,
good. You're good. It's all good. Well,
so the newest one that just went up this week is the wonderful movie Sorcerer with Roy Scheider and two trucks and a lot of nitroglycerin and a jungle. And that's, of course, Hangry Table and Lauren and I. And tonight we're recording our next one. And because it'll be after, it'll actually be available right about the time that you see this. Tonight, we're having fun with the hottest couple in Hollywood once upon a time, scandalously so, because they started having a very public affair when they were both married to other people. And that, of course, is Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor in a movie called Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which, if you've never seen it, boy, you should. I went to watch it again to refresh my memory. While you're watching this movie, keep repeating, Liz Taylor's only 32 when she's making this. And granted, they did a great wig and great makeup to make her seem older, and she put on some weight. But supposedly, when they talked about doing it, Burton, who loved her, said, you know what? You're not good enough to do this. And she said, yes, I am. And it was a contest, and they both won. They both won. And it's a great movie. It's a difficult movie, and it had lots of fights with the censors about the original script by Edward Albee. And Jack Warner wanted to do it in color, and Mike Nichols, whose first film it was, insisted on doing it in black and white. And anyway, it's a great movie, and we're doing that. But I was just looking next week. Oh, should we tell everybody? Should we give everybody a sneak preview because they tuned into this?
We could.
Well, Roy Scheider shows up again next week in what I think is maybe a better movie than the original it is a sequel to, and that is 2010, The Year We Make Contact, which is the sequel to 2001 and also stars Helen Mirren and John Lithgow. And it's so good. It's so good because, Roy Scheider has this unique ability to be us, whether he's Sheriff Brody or whether he's the guy who said, hey, what the heck is that? What's going on? He's the audience trying to figure out what's happening. And especially in that movie, he's the guy saying, well, what the heck are you? What is this Hal thing? And anyway, it's a great movie too. And we'll do many more. And we've done many already. And you should watch it. And you can start watching them on here now. So.
Yes, we will be making our public debut of the Genre Guys here very shortly. If we haven't already, still figuring out the schedule by the time of recording this right here. But you can leave your comments or not just your comments, your questions for this show, either in the comment section or right down below right there. You can use that email right there if it's more convenient for you.
Since
whatever you
must say, since this whole channel and this are premiering on a day that otherwise might be depressing for some, I hope we brought brightness to your tax day, because April 15th usually has a different connotation.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point right there.
We are the silver lining to the clouds. Although if you're getting a refund, well, that's a whole other story. Save it to buy a membership when we get memberships going, because we will.
That's right. That's right. Oh, we'll have memberships here. We will once this channel gets fully fleshed out right here. Things will be added. Things will change as all things do, but it'll be for the audience's benefit. That is for sure. Which, by the way, if you like this video, please share this video, like this video, comment down below if you really, really like it. Right there, we would very much appreciate it. And that about.
And if you didn't like it, don't tell anyone.
Yes, yes, yeah. My name is Fig. His name is Mint, and that's what we'll be right there, right? I think that's the joke.
Some imagination, huh?
Exactly right. The Hollywood Backlot with Lou and you. Thank you so much for joining us today.